If you've ever seen one of those incredible ukiyo-e woodblock prints,
Yeah.
with the vibrant colors and these impossibly elegant women.
Or the Oranduchu, that slow, almost regal procession.
Exactly. Then you've already had a glimpse into the world of Yoshiwara. For almost 400 years. It was this massive walled-off city within a city at the heart of Edo and then Tokyo.
And it's so important to get this right from the start. We're not just talking about a historical red light district. This was a full-blown institution. It was a social barometer for Japan.
A barometer of what exactly?
Everything. Political priorities, social control, economic necessity. It was born because the government needed it. It survived fires and earthquakes that leveled cities. And this is the fascinating part. It kept changing its legal identity to survive.
Right. It's like it was constantly shedding its skin to avoid being shut down. From the shogunate to the Meiji Restoration, even into the American occupation.
You just kept adapting.
That structural resilience, that's what we're really digging into today. How it kept its core function going by just changing the label on the outside. So our mission here is to chart that whole 400-year story. We're going to look at the history, the wild social structure inside, and of course, those incredibly cynical legal tricks that kept it running from the 1600s all the way to the 1950s.
We're going to show you how this massive, enclosed world was built really at the intersection of control, culture, and pure profit. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about Moto Yoshiwara, the original, founded in 1617.
Okay, so paint the picture for us. It's the early 1600s. Tokugawa Ieyasu has just set up the shogunate in Edo in 1603.
And Edo is exploding. It's not a city, it's a construction site, it's a boomtown. And this rapid, chaotic growth creates an immediate, and I mean immediate, demographic problem that the new government cannot possibly ignore.
And that problem was a massive gender imbalance.
Staggering. I mean, it's hard to even wrap your head around it. Edo was a city of samurai who had to leave their families behind. It was a city of construction workers, merchants, bureaucrats, all overwhelmingly men.
So what are we talking, numbers-wise?
Some sources suggest that even later, in the more settled mid-Edo period, something like 2/3 of the entire population was male.
2/3. That's not just a skew, that's a fundamental distortion of a society.
It is. And it creates this enormous, unstoppable demand for sex work. It's just a simple fact of the city's makeup.
So what did the Bakufu, the military government, do at first? It sounds like they just tried to pretend it wasn't happening.
Their first instinct was to crush it. You had these scattered prostitution houses, the yujo-ya, and the government's response was basically just to keep forcing them to move.
It's like a game of urban whack-a-mole.
That's the perfect analogy. They were playing whack-a-mole. But you can't suppress that kind of demand. All the scattered operations did was create chaos. It made it impossible to enforce any kind of moral standards or fuki, and maybe most importantly for the government,
They couldn't tax it.
they couldn't tax it effectively. So the Bakufu has this moment of realization. They can't stop it, so they have to control it. And if you want to control something, you centralize it. You put it all in one place.
Which brings us to our key figure, the man who saw this as a massive business opportunity, Shuji Jinemon.
Right. He's not an idealist. He's a shrewd businessman, a brothel operator from Sunpu, and he understood something fundamental. The best way for his business to thrive was to align his commercial goals with the government's need for control and revenue.
So he starts petitioning them.
Over and over. The approval finally comes in 1617, in the Jinna era. This is right after the siege of Osaka, so the Tokugawa regime is finally solidified. They've won. Now it's time to govern, and that means setting up stable revenue streams and bringing order to their brand new capital.
And the system they land on is a really big deal for how Japanese cities would be managed from then on. This Shushushiki ni Yorokushi Seido.
A public prostitution system by centralized aggregation.
Let's break that down. Why was centralized aggregation such a radical idea at the time?
Because before this, sex work existed, of course, but it was decentralized. It was local, scattered. By corralling it all into one single officially licensed zone, the Bakufu created this incredible new tool for social control.
So this place wasn't just tolerated, it was actively sanctioned.
Yes. It becomes a kind of lightning rod. You concentrate all the immoral activity in one spot, which keeps it out of sight for the rest of the city's population. But at the same time, it allows you to monitor every person who comes and goes and tax every single transaction. It's a genius mix of morality, public order, and cold, hard cash.
So what was the deal Ginchaman offered? What were the conditions he pitched to make this palatable to a pretty conservative military government?
He was incredibly clever. He offered 3 main conditions that were basically designed to appeal directly to the government's concerns.
Okay, what were they?
First, no overnight stays for clients. This suggested strict control, that it wouldn't be a place of all-night debauchery.
Right, keeping up appearances.
Second, he promised to investigate and return any girls who had been falsely sold into service. This was a nod to public relations, making it seem less like slavery.
A very thin veneer of ethics.
Very thin. And third, and this was crucial, he promised to report any criminals, ronin, or suspicious characters to the authorities.
So he was basically offering to run an intelligence gathering operation for the city magistrate.
Exactly. Let me run my business and I'll help you police the city. It's an offer they couldn't refuse.
But the Bakufu had demands of their own, right? And these demands set the stage for everything that followed.
Oh, absolutely. These were the non-negotiables that created the Yoshiwara monopoly. First, a total monopoly. No other official yujoya could operate anywhere in Edo. Period.
One ring to rule them all.
Second, the women were forbidden from being dispatched outside the quarters walls. No outcalls. All business had to happen inside, where it could be monitored.
And the third one is kind of surprising.
It is. They initially demanded that the buildings be simple and the women's clothing be non-extravagant.
That seems destined to fail.
Yeah.
Why would you insist on modesty in a place that's selling luxury and fantasy?
It was all about class and optics. In the beginning, this first Yoshiwara was meant primarily for the samurai class. The Bakufu saw extravagance, especially among commoners, as morally corrupting and politically dangerous.
So it's okay for the samurai as long as it's kept quiet and doesn't look too fun.
That's the logic.
Yeah.
The government's main goals were tax payments, the Meishikin public order, and a bit of moral oversight. The operators knew that getting that monopoly was worth agreeing to some modesty rules that, let's be honest, they probably knew they wouldn't follow for long, and they were right.
Okay, let's talk about the location of this first iteration. Moto Yoshiwara. It was near Nihonbashi, right in what's now the Ningyocho area.
A very central location. And the story of the name is fantastic because it tells you just how humble the origins were.
This is the part about the reeds, right?
Exactly. The site was reclaimed marshland. It was boggy, wet, and covered in reeds, which in Japanese are yoshiashi. So the place was initially called Ni, Yoshiwara, which literally means reed plain.
But the character for Yoshi there, D, had a bit of a negative connotation, didn't it?
It did. It could sound like the word for bad. So the operators, who were all about marketing, quickly petitioned to change it. They swapped the reed character for a much more auspicious one, which means good fortune.
So reed plain becomes good fortune plain.
A classic bit of rebranding. And this new formal place, which was kind of modeled on Kyoto's older district, Shimabara, was almost exclusively for samurai at first. Commoners were generally kept out of the top-tier houses.
And the operating hours were also strictly controlled.
Very strictly. It was daytime only. Night operations were banned until 1640. It was another signal that this was a disciplined, high-status institution for the ruling class, not some chaotic all-night party zone. But, as it turned out, its central location would be its undoing.
So as you said, Edo is just growing at this incredible pace. And by the 1650s, Moto Yoshiwara is no longer on the outskirts.
Not at all. It's suddenly prime real estate. It's surrounded by expanding estates of powerful daimyo lords, and it's just too close to the heart of the shogun's government. The Bakufu decides it has to go.
They order a move, but then nature, or maybe fate, dramatically speeds up the timeline.
It does. A truly cataclysmic event clears the board completely. We're talking about the Mireki Great Fire of 1657.
Often called the Furisode Fire, the long-sleeve kimono fire. This wasn't just a neighborhood fire, was it?
This was an apocalypse for Edo. It's estimated that it destroyed more than half the city, maybe as much as 2/3. It was a total reset. And in the middle of that devastation, with Moto Yoshiwara now just a heap of smoking ash.
The government sees an opportunity.
A huge opportunity. They can finally push the quarter far away from the city center. The planned move is no longer a polite request. It's an absolute necessity. And they can rebuild it from scratch exactly where they want it and exactly how they want it.
So where does it end up?
It's moved way out to what was then the countryside, to Asakusa Tambo, the rice fields behind Sensuji Temple. This is the area we know today as Senzoku-in Taito Ward. And this new quarter is called Shin Yoshiwara, New Yoshiwara.
And this relocation marks a fundamental shift in what Yoshiwara was, doesn't it?
It's a colossal shift. Moto Yoshiwara was a formal daytime retreat for samurai. Shin Yoshiwara becomes a walled-off, all-night commercial powerhouse aimed at everyone, the rising merchant class, commoners, as well as the samurai.
The government clearly needed it to succeed because they offered some massive incentives to the operators to make the move happen.
Oh, the incentives tell you just how much they valued the tax revenue and the social control it offered. The Northtown magistrate at the time, a man named Isadani Sadakio, helped push through a major grant.
So what did they get?
First, land. They got 50% more land, an area 3 blocks square, which let them build on a much grander scale. They also got 15,000 rishin in cash to help with rebuilding.
Which is a huge amount of money. But the biggest prize was the change in the rules.
That was the real game changer. They were finally permitted night operation.
And that changes the entire business model.
Completely. It's no longer a place for a daytime appointment. It's now a 24-hour cultural and entertainment ecosystem. It's a destination.
And while they're setting up this new, bigger, better Yoshiwara, the Bakufu decides it's time to get rid of the competition once and for all.
Yes. This is where they really show their commitment to the monopoly. The crackdown is swift and it's brutal. They forcibly shut down about 200 fusha.
These were the bathhouses that had Yuna, the bath attendants who were also engaging in prostitution.
Exactly. They were the main source of cheaper, non-licensed competition. By wiping them out, the government ensured that all that customer demand would be funneled directly into the new, taxable, and controllable Shin Yoshiwara.
So let's talk about the design of this new place. This is what really captures the imagination. It wasn't just a neighborhood. It was designed to be a fortress, the Kurua.
And that word, kurua, is so perfect. It means citadel or enclosure. The whole district was deliberately built to be an isolated, self-contained world. A city within a city.
Surrounded by what?
High, black painted fences. And most famously, a moat. An encircling moat known as the Ni.
The Black Teeth Moat. That is such an evocative name. Where does it come from?
The primary source seems to be the color of the water. It was stagnant, it was polluted, it was essentially the quarter's sewer as well as a defensive barrier, so it was black. But the name Ohaguro Dobu is just dripping with symbolism.
Because ohaguro was the practice of blackening one's teeth, a sign of beauty and marital status for aristocratic women.
Exactly. So you have this symbol of high-class artificial beauty being applied to a dark, filthy sewer ditch. It's this perfect, unsettling metaphor for the quarter itself, this place of cultivated artificial elegance floating on a foundation of waste and confinement.
And getting into this fortress was a tightly controlled process.
Completely. There was only one way in and one way out for the public. The magnificent main gate, the Ta Amono.
And you couldn't just walk straight up to it, could you?
No, the approach was deliberately indirect. You had to go up a curving path called the Emansaka, the dress slope, maybe because people would adjust their kimonos there before entering. Then you walked along the Uyu, a 50-ken-long path, to reach the gate.
We've heard this fascinating detail that the curved path was designed according to Onmyodo principles, the philosophy of yin and yang. That's more than just practical urban planning.
Oh, it's absolutely theatrical. It's about mystification. By creating a winding entrance instead of a direct one, the design was meant to control the flow of energy, to ritually separate the outside world from the inside. It made you feel like you were crossing a threshold into a different reality.
A magical but very controlled realm, and the gates reinforce that.
With a strict timetable. The Sriman slammed shut at midnight, or Eikoku, and didn't reopen until 6 a.m. If you were in for the night. If you were out, you were out. This physical and temporal barrier was fundamental to the government's goal. Let the business happen, but keep it completely quarantined.
What was it like inside? What was the layout?
The main artery was Akanamachi Duty. This was the grand central thoroughfare where you'd see the processions and where the most prestigious houses were located. The rest of the town was divided into 6 main blocks, which reflected the origins of the original brothel owners who moved from Moto Yoshiwara. You had Edo Block 1 and 2, Kyucho Block 1 and 2, and so on.
But all this careful planning and this isolation created a massive vulnerability, didn't it? The very thing that led to the move in the first place. Fire.
It was an existential threat. Shin Yoshiwara suffered 22 catastrophic fires between 1671 and 1866. And here's the cruel irony of the government's control. The operators were granted an exemption from having to help fight fires in neighboring districts, a nice perk. But the flip side was that when a fire started inside the kurua, no outside help was allowed in.
So the walls that kept people in also kept the firefighters out.
Precisely. The enclosure meant that a fire almost always led to a total loss.
So if the whole thing burned down, what stopped the operators from just setting up shop somewhere else in a cheaper, unofficial area and keeping the profits?
That was the constant fear for the authorities. They couldn't let that happen. Immediately after a fire, temporary shelters or karitaku might be allowed nearby. But the quarter was always rebuilt on the same spot, and rebuilt with incredible speed. They had to get the official taxable monopoly back up and running before the operators could get any ideas about going independent. The economic imperative always won. By the time Shin Yoshiwara is really up and running, it is the undisputed king of the licensed districts in Japan. It's the largest of the 3 officially sanctioned quarters, far bigger and more culturally influential than Osaka's Shinmachi or Kyoto Shimabara.
But, as we talked about, the official monopoly was really only a monopoly on paper, at least when you looked at the entire country.
That's a crucial point. The demand was everywhere. So you had these unofficial areas, these okabasho, popping up all over the place. The post stations along the big highways, like the Tukiryu places like Shinagawa, were famous for it.
Right, the so-called serving women at the ends there.
Exactly. Our sources list at least 25 other well-known quarters across the country, from Nagasaki in the south to Hakata. So Yoshiwara's preeminence wasn't about being the only place. It was about prestige, scale, and its official link to the government.
And that prestige allowed it to become the absolute engine of Edo culture. This is the golden age we hear about. It was so much more than just a commercial district.
It was the crucible where high culture and high commerce just melted together. Yoshiwara set the trends for all of Edo. A new hairstyle, a new pattern for a kimono, a new way of applying makeup. It would start in the Kuruwa and then be copied by women all over the city.
And it had this deep connection to the theater world, too.
A symbiotic relationship with kabuki. Actors would visit, courtesans would attend plays, and styles would cross back and forth. If you want to understand that core Edo aesthetic of Iki, that kind of effortless, sophisticated, cool, you have to look at Yoshiwara. It was invented there.
And for a client, especially a wealthy one, it wasn't just about walking in and buying a service. It was about participating in this incredibly complex and expensive ritual.
Absolutely. The procedure was incredibly formal. A first-time client, especially one hoping to meet a top-ranking courtesan, didn't just knock on the door of the brothel.
No, you had to go through an intermediary first.
You had to go to a hikiti chaya. This was a designated tea house that acted as a combination booking agent, banquet hall, and screening service. You'd host lavish parties there, maybe over several visits, just to prove you had the money and the status. Only then might the courtesan agree to meet you.
It's a system designed to filter out anyone who wasn't part of the elite.
And to drive up the price and the mystique, this rigid hierarchy was everything.
So let's talk about that hierarchy. Who was at the very top?
At the absolute pinnacle for the first century or so was the taio. This rank was so exclusive and the women so highly trained that it eventually became too expensive to maintain. So after about 1757, the taia becomes the top rank.
And these women were expected to be more than just beautiful. They were cultural artisans.
They were expected to be polymaths. They had to be educated in classical literature, skilled in poetry, calligraphy, playing musical instruments like the koto. And above all, they had to possess this incredible social grace to entertain and converse with powerful daimyo and wealthy merchants. They were entertainers, artists, and celebrities rolled into one.
Their status was on public display, too, with the whole retinue they had.
Their retinues were a walking advertisement of their value. They were always accompanied by child apprentices, the komuro, and teenage girls who were training to become oiran themselves. The Furisode Shinzo, the oiran's whole look, the dozen or more heavy hairpins, the impossibly high platform sandals, it was all designed to make them look larger than life, almost divine.
And this brings us to that central paradox. The oiran had the power to refuse clients. They had this immense prestige. How do we square that with the fact that, as foreign critics later pointed out, they were essentially slaves?
That is the ultimate heartbreaking paradox of Yoshiwara. Inside the walls, a top-ranking oiran wielded real power. She could turn down a client. The rules even said that once a client became her regular, her najimi, he was forbidden from seeing any other woman in the quarter.
So she commanded loyalty and a high price.
Immense loyalty, but that power only existed within the confines of the commercial system. It doesn't change the fundamental fact that she was property. Her entire existence was built on a foundation of debt that controlled her body, her time, and her future.
And that elite status was incredibly rare. The vast majority of women were much, much further down the ladder.
Oh, the vast majority. Below the Oren, you had ranks like Kushi and Hashijoro. And then as more women were forced into the licensed system, even lower tiers were created, like Sancha. At the very bottom of the barrel were the Nishu Joro, the two-shoe girls, named for their rock-bottom price.
Which brings us to the brutal reality of how these women ended up there in the first place. The human cost.
The sources are crystal clear on this. The overwhelming majority came into the system through hirain, miori, being sold, usually by destitute farming families during a famine, or by merchants whose businesses had failed.
They were economic refugees, sold to pay off family debts.
Precisely. And when Westerners began to arrive in Japan in the 19th century and saw the system up close, they were horrified. They didn't mince words. They argued that the yujotachi wa dore to onaji, the courtesans, were the same as slaves.
And the debt trap was specifically designed to make sure that once you were in, you could almost never get out.
It was a brilliantly insidious financial machine. A top oiran had to maintain this impossibly expensive lifestyle. The cost of her silk kimonos, her makeup, her staff's wages, even the food she ate, it was all meticulously recorded and added to the debt from her original sale price.
So the debt was always growing faster than she could possibly earn.
Exactly. She was in a constant race to extract more and more money from her patrons, not to get rich, but just to keep her head above the rising tide of a debt that was designed to be unpayable.
And if a woman failed, if she got sick, or broke the rules, or just couldn't earn enough, the consequences were horrifying.
This is one of the darkest parts of the story. If a woman tried to run away, or was caught stealing, or was just deemed commercially useless because of illness, she was often disposed of with shocking brutality. Her body would be taken to Uru, Jukanji Temple, just outside the quarter.
Which earned the nickname Naj Komidera.
The throw-in temple.
Literally throw-in. Why was it done that way? Just dumping the bodies.
It was cold, hard economics. A proper funeral costs money. You have to pay a priest, pay for a burial, by stripping the women of their clothes and just throwing the bodies into the temple grounds. The brothel owners saved that expense. It was the final, ultimate dehumanization.
And we have an idea of the scale of this from historical disasters, don't we?
The 1855 Ansei earthquake is a terrifying example. The quarter was badly damaged, and the death toll among the women was huge. In the aftermath, the bodies of 600 women from Yoshiwara were taken and unceremoniously dumped at Jukanji. It's this one visceral number that just cuts through all the fantasy of the floating world and shows you the brutal, disposable reality underneath. The golden age of Yoshiwara, its peak cultural and economic power, was really in the mid-Edo period. By the 19th century, well before the fall of the shogunate, you can start to see its dominance beginning to fade.
And ironically, it was its own formality and high cost that started to drive customers away. The average person in Edo just couldn't afford it.
Exactly. The common person wanted something cheaper, faster, and less complicated. This created a huge market for private, unlicensed prostitution, the shishugai.
So you have these other districts, like Fukagawa and Shinagawa, popping up and becoming major entertainment hubs in their own right.
Right. They offered a different kind of vibe, less formal, more accessible. And then you had streetwalkers, the yotaka, who would charge as little as the price of a bowl of noodles. Yoshiwara, with its high overheads and rigid rituals, just couldn't compete for that mass market.
Then, in 1868, the whole political world is turned upside down. The Meiji Restoration happens. I can't imagine the new government had much affection for an institution so deeply tied to the old Tokugawa regime.
That's a huge factor. The new political leaders were mostly from the western domains, Satsuma, Choshu. They saw Yoshiwara as a relic of the old world. They preferred the newer, more modern entertainment districts that were closer to the new centers of power, places like Shimbashi and Akasaka.
So Yoshiwara becomes unfashionable. Old news.
It's seen as a bit stuffy, a bit too formal, and tainted by its association with the losing side. But the real threat, the one that forced the first major legal change, didn't come from inside Japan. It came from outside.
It's international press.
Massive international pressure. Japan is desperately trying to modernize, to present itself as a civilized nation to the West so it can renegotiate these terrible, unequal treaties. And the existence of a massive state-sanctioned system of what foreigners called slavery was a huge embarrassment.
It was a bad look on the world stage.
A terrible look. This pressure builds and builds until it leads to this watershed moment in October 1872. The government issues the Jishikaishure.
The Geisha and Prostitute Emancipation Edict. That sounds incredibly definitive. It sounds like the end of the story.
It was meant to sound definitive. It was a declaration to the world that Japan was abolishing this form of servitude. But what happened next is probably the single most brilliant and cynical piece of legal footwork in this entire 400-year history.
The Great Escape Act.
The Great Escape Act. The brothel owners, with what seems to be a quiet nod from the government, immediately came up with a legal workaround that allowed them to continue business as usual, almost without missing a beat.
Okay, you have to walk us through this. How did they get around an emancipation edict?
They did it by changing 2 words. The brothel houses, the yujoya, instantly rebranded themselves as kashizashiki,
Which means?
room for rent.
Ah.
And at the same time, the women, now officially called shugi, were no longer legally considered property of the house. No. They were now independent contractors who were simply renting a room to conduct their own private business.
So the woman is now a freelancer, an entrepreneur, and the brothel owner is just a landlord.
That was the legal fiction. The debt that had bound them was converted from a purchase price into a loan, an advance against their future earnings that they'd use to pay their rent. The trap was the same, but the legal language describing it was different.
It's just staggering hypocrisy. But it worked. It satisfied the foreign powers on paper.
It worked perfectly. It allowed the Meiji government to go to the West and say, see, we've abolished slavery.
Meanwhile, back home, the flow of impoverished girls from the countryside into the newly named Kashizashiki continued just as it always had. The law changed its name, but the underlying social and economic reality didn't change at all. Did any later laws in the Meiji period try to fix this loophole?
There were attempts to regulate it, yes. In 1900, they brought in the Utrime, Shuji Torishimari Kisoku, the prostitution control regulations. And these regulations included a very important new principle, in theory.
Which was?
The freedom to quit, jiyu hagichika kano. A woman could theoretically cease operations and leave as long as she wasn't in debt.
As long as she wasn't in debt. There's the catch, isn't it? The entire system was still designed to keep them in debt.
That's the catch. It didn't do anything to stop the practice of miri, of parents selling their daughters into the system to begin with. So for the vast majority, this freedom to quit was a complete illusion. And so Yoshiwara, under its new legal wrapper, continued to thrive right up into the 20th century. By the 1920s, there were still over 50,000 registered shuji working in hundreds of licensed districts all across Japan. The 20th century just brings one catastrophe after another for Yoshiwara, physically speaking. But every single time, the district just proves how resilient it is.
The cycle of fire we talked about never really stopped. There was another massive fire in 1911.
A huge one. The Yoshiwara Great Fire, which burned something like 6,500 houses in and around the district. But the event that is really seared into the national memory, the one that became this iconic moment of tragedy, was the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923.
And the stories from that day are just beyond belief. The incident at Sumanuya, Hanazono Pond, or Benton Pond inside the quarter.
It's a true vision of hell on earth. When the earthquake hit, fires broke out everywhere and merged into this massive firestorm, a Hino Umi, a sea of fire. Hundreds of people inside the walls of Yoshiwara, desperate to escape the flames, rushed to the only open space with water, Hanazono Pond.
They jumped in to save themselves.
They jumped in, but the heat from the surrounding inferno was so intense that the water in the pond literally began to boil. So they were trapped, burned alive by the flames if they stayed out, and boiled alive if they went in. The estimates vary, but it's thought that up to 600 people died right there in that one spot, including at least 88 recorded shugi. It's this one horrific, concentrated image of the suffering that was always just beneath the surface.
And yet, even after that, it was rebuilt, only to be destroyed again almost completely in World War II.
The Tokyo air raids in 1945 flattened the area. But what's really incredible is that even as the war was clearly being lost, in June of 1945, the authorities ordered the quarter to be rebuilt.
While bombs were still falling. Why?
The official justification was to secure public order and boost morale. The need for a controlled outlet was considered that essential. And sure enough, business was back up and running in August 1945, just in time for the arrival of the American occupation forces.
Which presented a whole new set of challenges and a whole new need for legal gymnastics.
A completely new chapter. The Japanese government, anticipating the needs of the occupying soldiers, set up this bizarre official agency called the RAA, the Recreation and Amusement Association.
Basically, government-run brothels for the Allied troops.
That's exactly what they were. But it was a disaster. The spread of venereal disease among the U.S. soldiers became rampant, and by 1946, a furious General MacArthur and GHQ stepped in. They issued the Chushes Haishishire in order to abolish all public prostitution. The RAA was shut down.
So once again, the government is forced to abolish the system, which means it's time for the third great legal fiction in Yoshiwara's history.
The third, costume change. The quarter rebrands itself almost overnight as the Shire, Tokushu and Shokutendai.
The special restaurant area.
Special restaurant area. To comply with the GHQ order, all the old debt contracts were publicly burned and destroyed.
So what was the new legal pretense? What made these restaurants so special?
The new story was this. The women were employees of the restaurant. They would serve a customer food and drink. And then, any sexual act that occurred afterward happened out of shinyune.
Free love.
Free love. And the money the client paid, that wasn't a fee for a service. That was legally classified as a present or a tip, freely given.
A present for the free love you just had in a special restaurant. It's beyond parody.
It is the ultimate legal fig leaf. And these areas became known across Japan as Akasenjitai, the red light districts, and they flourished. This model worked right through the post-war recovery until the mid-1950s.
But the final end, the real legal end, didn't come from foreign pressure this time. It came from within Japan itself.
That's right. After decades of debate, the Diet finally passed the Tashun Bushihu, the prostitution prevention law, in 1956. And this law was different. It didn't just regulate the houses, it formally defined and outlawed the act of exchanging money for sex. After a 2-year grace period, on April 1st, 1958, the lights of the Tokushu in Shikuten went out for good, and the 340-year history of the license quarter officially came to an end. But of course, the story doesn't really end there. The law changed, but the location, the infrastructure, and the demand didn't just vanish overnight. The district just adapted one more time, finding a new loophole, this time in the regulations around bathhouses. The transformation was almost instantaneous. The special restaurants closed, and in their place, Torikaburo Turkish baths opened.
This is the next legal, guys. A health and hygiene service.
Right. These were bathhouses with private rooms where a woman would provide a service called akasuri, a full-body scrub. And that service very quickly expanded to include other services. It was the same business under a new health-based pretense.
And that name, Torikaburo, eventually became an international issue itself, didn't it?
It did. Years later, in 1984, the Turkish embassy in Tokyo formally protested, saying that using the name of their country for these establishments was offensive. So the industry, ever adaptable, held a contest and changed the name.
To the name we know today, Soapland.
A completely made-up English word, Soapland, which is what the district is still known as today.
So what's physically left of the old Yoshiwara? Can you still see the ghost of the Kuruwa?
You can. The footprint of the old walled quarter is still visible in the street layout. You can still trace the curve of the old entrance path, the Emansaka. But the historical name itself, Ifes, was eventually removed from official city addresses. It was a deliberate attempt to erase the stigma.
And who's in charge of keeping order there now?
It's interesting. The area is largely overseen by local groups like the Asakusa Crime Prevention and Safety Cooperation Association. In a way, they've taken on the public order role that the shogun's magistrate used to play, managing the district from the inside.
And even though the name is gone from the map, the social legacy, the stigma, that must have been incredibly difficult for the people who grew up there.
The social scars are very deep. For generations, children born inside the Kuruwa faced terrible prejudice. They struggled to get into schools, to find jobs, to find marriage partners outside the community. Many had to completely change their legal residence to escape that history. The walls of Yoshiwara were social as well as physical.
And yet we come back to this final paradox. Despite all the tragedy, all the exploitation, the culture that was forged inside that prison, it's become a cherished part of Japan's artistic heritage.
It's the central tension you can never escape. So much of what we consider classic Edo culture, the literature of writers like Saikaku, the entire art form of ukiyo-e, the fashions of kabuki, it all came directly out of the Kuruwa. It shows you how a place designed by the state to contain and manage human misery could, at the same time, become the forge for the era's highest forms of style and sophistication. That link between the beauty and the brutality is just. It's inextricable.
A 400-year story of survival through constant reinvention. It's truly incredible. So when you pull it all together, we've traced this incredible arc. From a tiny government-sanctioned business deal on a swamp in 1617 to this grand fortified city of culture and tragedy in Yoshiwara, and then through this century-long dance of legal evasion. It just kept changing costumes, from Yujoiga to Kashizashiki to Tokushu and Shokuten, and finally to Soapland.
And if there's one core takeaway, it's that the history of Yoshiwara is really a history of legal fiction. It's about the constant tension between moral appearances and financial reality. At every stage, the authorities, whether it was the shogunate, the Meiji government, or the post-war administration, they always chose a legal mechanism that created a plausible-sounding story.
The story that a present was given for free love in a restaurant.
Exactly. They needed a story that would appease the critics both at home and abroad while making sure that the very profitable, very taxable, and very orderly business could just keep on running.
And that separation was always the key. The whole point of the Kuruwa was that it was designed to be separate from what they called general civil society, Ippan Shimin Shakai, to Wakutanara Seikaku. It was supposed to be this contained world, a necessary evil kept out of sight.
Which brings us to the really provocative question we want to leave you with. Despite that deliberate, extreme isolation, Yoshiwara became the absolute, uncontested heart of Edo's culture, its fashion, its art, its music. So what does it tell you about a society when its highest, most celebrated forms of style and elegance are so deeply and inextricably tied to a place that was built from the ground up to contain and profit from human poverty and exploitation? Think about that tension, that paradox, the next time you look at a beautiful ukiyo-e print. What cherished parts of our own culture today might rest on foundations that we'd now find morally compromised? That's something to think about.